Today we're going to look at the games from day 3 in the Magnus Carlsen Tour Finals. Obviously, yesterday Magnus struck back against Hikaru to even the overall match at 1-1. And I also want to welcome so many of you that discovered my channel after yesterday's video. It got spread out throughout YouTube and I couldn't be more grateful, so thank you. Today we're going to look at 6 games. Let's jump into it. Hikaru had the white pieces to start off, and he got the game going with a Spanish. Magnus responded with knight f6. This is the Berlin defense looking to take on e4 right away. d3, bishop c5, this quick trade. Knight d2, castles. And there's a lot of different setups here. Sometimes white maneuvers the knight over to g3. Sometimes white plays knight c4 and moves this bishop out. There's a lot of different positions where a4 and a5 happen by both sides, as well as the move h3. And we saw yesterday in the blitz game, Hikaru and Magnus both castled queenside. Now, in this game, a lot of those things happened. a4, a5, this is just sort of like the meta, if you will, of the Ruy Lopez, the Spanish positions. Bishop e3, Hikaru offers a trade early, b6, and now the whole reason why the thumbnail is what it is, and the name of the video up there is what it is, h4. Spoiler alert, in every game that you're going to see today, with the exception of like one real game, the move h4 happens on the board. I don't know what is going on at the top level of chess, this revolution of computer influence, but they are all playing this. And so queen e8 to try to transfer the queen to the light squares, and Hikaru plays g3. Bishop goes back to e7 to try to clear out this space and open up the light squared bishop. So we get knight e1, knight c5, and knight g2. And it looked like Hikaru in the game was rerouting his knight to push the f-pawn, but he played too tentatively, it seemed. After bishop e6, b3, Magnus just got all his pieces into the game in their optimal setup, and this was the moment where Hikaru could have played a bit more aggressively with f4, but chose the move f3. And so Magnus took on c4. Normally the bishop for the knight is not a good trade, but now he transfers his queen in, and it looks like he's about to do some serious damage to the position. But somehow Hikaru is just on time. For example, if black were to play f5 here, you would be able to trap this queen. There is one pretty cool variation that goes knight takes e4 check. You have to take the knight. And then when black takes, there is now a discovered check. You move your king and queen takes g3. This is something that could have happened. It didn't happen, but the queen is not quite trapped. And so Magnus just didn't like that, I guess, and backed out. And now Hikaru had to play the move g4. He had to shut down f5 and enter a funny tactical idea, h5, to try to break things up. Bishop c5 check, and king g3. And somehow the king is completely safe here because black is not able to break things open on this side of the board. But we got f5, takes, and the queen came back to h3, and now this is a very big problem. Bishop f2, bishop d6, and black's position with the threats on the open lines, and the queen powerful, the rook powerful, the knight powerful, well, it collapsed. Magnus doubled up on the f-file to put maximum pressure, did not trade the queens, instructive moment, did not trade the queens, because he's on the attacking side. If you're attacking, you don't want to trade the queen, and then just picked up a couple of pawns. Here, maybe the most instructive moment, he focused on this pawn, and he went on to win the game. Hikaru played this out just for a little bit longer, but there was nothing that could be done. Magnus transformed the position into a rook endgame, and even though he lost one pawn, the rook n2 versus just the lone king and the rook on that side of the board was enough to get Hikaru to resign and to get Magnus a 1-point lead. Again, not too much to analyze here. This is just completely winning. You would bring the pawns together along the rook, and white is not equipped to stop this, and so Magnus takes a 1-0 lead. In the second game, it was Magnus opening up with e4, e5, Hikaru welcoming a Ruy Lopez and also going for his own Berlin. And now, again, these two are trolls, because in the one game where we did not get a real h4, early on, we got a Berlin defense, and I'm not even going to waste your time. Okay, I'm going to get right to the critical position. If you'd like me to do a lesson on the Berlin defense, I'm truly sorry. I just want to do a full recap. And, well, it was in this position that Hikaru repeated moves, and Magnus allowed it. And so both of them started laughing on camera. Why is this funny? Because yesterday in the Berlin defense, Hikaru repeated 2 times with the white pieces, so now Magnus is returning the favor by also repeating with the white pieces. We move on to game number 3. Hikaru still facing a 1.5 deficit and another Spanish. Again, I'm not spending too much time with the opening here. This is everything we've seen so far. Now is where things get interesting. Without castling, no castling and no a4, Hikaru busts out this move h4. We get a5, we get h5. And this is the thumbnail of the entire video. I mean, what is this even? Like, this breaks all beginner principles. I mean, all the beginners watching are looking to these grandmasters to be role models, and these guys are playing h4, h5. So Magnus plays b5, Hikaru brings the knight back to the center. Knight f8, trying to route this guy to e6, bishop d2 developing, and now a nice move, a4. a4 and h4 are not very much the same. The idea is that you're trying to damage the structure and play rook takes a5. Magnus thought for a very long time here and played b4, b3, bishop a6, and g3 from Hikaru, trying to prevent knight f4. And in the game, we got takes, and a stunning move, f5. The idea is that you are trying to give this pawn away, jump into d4, and whatever you take with, you're going to open up the e-file for this rook, and it is devastating. Actually, f5 looks like it's going to destroy this position because of also the bishop on this diagonal, and you are unable to recapture back. And Hikaru here played one of the most disrespectful but aesthetic moves I've ever seen. It's disrespectful, it's a joke. It's not actually disrespecting his opponent, but it's just such a funny looking move, and it is the best move, and it's the only move, and that move is rook h4, which is just so funny. If you don't see the humor in this move, I mean, this is how scholastic players play, you know? Like, this is how they get their rooks out. So we get pawn takes e4, not in the game, but I'm saying this is a possibility. Rook takes e4, and there is going to be some actual damage on this square. So Magnus plays f4, bishop d2, jumps in with the knight, but here misevaluates this endgame. Magnus trades everything, goes a pawn up, but here it's actually not so simple. In endgames, you can have a pawn advantage, but it's about your piece activity. He's only got 2 rooks and a bishop, and they can't really do much. And not to mention his pawns. Look at his pawns. In opposite-colored bishop endgames, you need your pawns and bishop to kind of complement each other. And Magnus's pawns are just sitting targets for the dark squared bishop. The base of the pawn chain is right here for white. This bishop is never going to get there. And so watch as Hikaru transfers his pieces to the king side, right? Plays rook f2, gets a trade, and then out of nowhere, Magnus just blunders, I guess. I don't know what happened here, but maybe he thought he was holding, but he plays king f7, allows a trade of rooks, and bishop d8. Gobble, 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 and that's it. Hikaru picked up a couple of pawns and brought his king, and here was where Magnus resigned. And he resigned because it's a relatively straightforward victory. You move the bishop, and because the threat of going to d8 is always on the board, the king cannot move from that square, and then white is just going to walk in with the king to either direction, pick up material, and win the game. And so Hikaru evened the match. In the final rapid game, Magnus played a London, which kind of was stunning, actually. And then Hikaru played an early queen b6, and I guess it's important to point out that Magnus played this tricky knight c3 move, and you cannot take on b2 because of knight b5. It's a kind of a tricky, London sideline. I played Eric Rosen in a lot of different Londons. It's also up on my channel. You can try to trick some opponents with early knight c3s. I also have a London 10-minute video. So if you're a London player, take a look at this. But it was a relatively straightforward opening, and Hikaru seemed to do a decent job of stabilizing, trading the bishops, trading the queens, playing his knight into f4, developing, and then we got another h4. By the way, in case it wasn't obvious, last game we got h4. This time Magnus goes h4. Here, there's not. I don't want to spend 15 minutes analyzing this game because it's not super important. It's a middle and end game with no queens. The objective of both players here is to keep their king safe, bring their rooks to the open files, which is what they do. Magnus trades off the light-squared bishop because his light-squared bishop doesn't have any active square to go on. And perhaps the one moment of the game that's instructive is right here, where Hikaru put his b6 knight in front of the b7 pawn, and Magnus found a great move. And I will point out that it is a great move, because I did receive some comments yesterday that were, they were intense comments saying I really dislike Magnus Carlsen, and I never say anything nice about him. I don't know where they come from, but b4 was a great move. He's trying to go knight c5. And then Hikaru had to stabilize with rook b8, knight c5. But then here Magnus didn't play a great move. He sacrificed the a4 pawn. Takes, and, you know, Hikaru wins a pawn, and I'm assuming that Magnus just thought that the knight was going to be stuck. And since it's stuck, he'll focus on the other side of the board and he'll be able to win. You'll force black to play b5, and that's it. The knight is gone from the game. But Hikaru did well here. He played rook a1, rook d8, knight c2, and opened up the position to transfer this rook into the game to try to create some counterplay while Magnus put some pressure on the pawns with his knight. Now, it was right here where apparently Magnus had a winning maneuver. He had to play a rook e2, rook e5. And from there, he would be the first one to just basically get all of these pawns. And that was the big moment. Ceci exploded. Everybody watching was panicking. But Magnus played rook b1. And, well, a few moves later, the players just repeated moves because Hikaru found a way to bring the pawns forward and reactivate his knight. I'll show that one more time. The reason he can't play a5, b4 is because the rook maintains vision. And so if you ever were to play a5, I would play rook takes. But the second the rook moves away, now you are enabled to play a5, b4, and he takes advantage. Trade happens. Magnus offers a trade of rooks, and Hikaru doesn't want to trade his rook. And so they repeat, and so we get blitz. And on that note, it is 2-2. Hikaru has the white pieces. Nothing that we haven't seen before. Pretty much a Berlin match at this point. And some very small wrinkles. But now Hikaru plays bishop d2. So again, continuously throwing in, you know, little tricks and traps. And, well, the move that we're all waiting for. h4. More trolling. I mean, what do you like... Just h4. It just seems to be the golden rule. What can I say? Knight e6. But here... the difference is that the e5 pawn isn't, in fact, tactically protected. A couple games ago, you'll remember, I think it was maybe was it the first game or the third game where there was this knight takes e5, but he couldn't quite play it because Magnus had tricks here. But this position, knight takes e5 is possible, because if you play knight d4, equaling two threats onto my pieces, not equaling, threatening my pieces 2 times, I have the brilliant knight takes f7, which did not exist in the other position because the rook was on f8, I believe. And here, if king f7, first of all, if you take my queen and I take your queen and you take and I take, white is happy. The other thing about knight takes f7 is that if you take, my queen checks you and I win the bishop and I defend my c2 pawn even more and I'm doing very well. And so Magnus hung a pawn. Then Hikaru played queen h5, not interested in gobbling. He goes for the checkmate. g6, threatening another mate, f6, and now we pick up the pawn. And here you can try to find the win for the white pieces. As always, I will wait, take a sip of my Lake Rocks. And the move is relatively straightforward. Queen takes f6, you wreck the structure of the black position. If queen takes c6, bishop c3 with irresistible danger on this file, rook f8, queen h8, he picks up every single pawn Magnus has to offer, and king d7, finish it off. It's not all about checks when you are attacking the king. You can also damage your opponent's position based on how their pieces are set up. Checks, captures, attacks. In this position, the only check is queen h7, and it doesn't do anything because we just came from there. The only capture is queen e6 and bishop a5. Both of those moves are terrible. Attacks. How do we create a threat? d4. Actually, if you look around, d4 is the only move that creates a threat because everything else is protected. I mean, okay, you can say, like, I don't know, bishop g7. You also have b4, but then I just take. d4 wins. Because anything that takes, you have constant pressure of long castles and the rook opposite the king. You always should try to open the position when the opponent's king is in the center like this. And after b4, dc5, Magnus just resigned. Literally just resigned in disgust. Hikaru went up, and now the final blitz game. Magnus has the white pieces. Will he win to force an Armageddon? c4, e5, and, well... This was, spoiler alert, one of the only games where we did not get an h4. In fact, it was the only game we didn't get an h4. The other game being the repetition, so I don't count that. So this position, I'm fast forwarding a little bit because right before this move, we've already seen this. We saw this in yesterday's match. This is in English with an early d5 and a knight rotation to b6. And so we have d4, an aggressive central pawn sacrifice where Magnus tries to get a quick recapture because he's got a lead in development and Hikaru's not yet castled. So Hikaru sacrifices the pawn, his intention being that if Magnus were to take, then he blocks his own queen. We actually also saw this yesterday. Bishop b2, f6, and now Magnus just gets a much better position. Hikaru mentioned in the interview afterwards, not on Chess24, but on his own Twitch channel where Anna Rudolph and I were doing commentary. He joined us after, and he said in this position he was very worried about the move e4 and with a potential sacrificial idea where if you play c5 to try to win this knight using this pin, white has e5, a brilliant piece sacrifice resulting in a position like this. And he basically said he was terrified here. And, you know, a computer might be able to hold this, but this is extremely dangerous because the bishop is coming and white is extremely active. But that did not happen. Instead, Magnus got it to this position, a queenless middle game where he's got bishop and knight pressure on Hikaru's position. Then we get king e6, e4, rook c8, and Hikaru tries to solve his problems by throwing in c4. Rook d1, g6, knight d4, and now it becomes painfully clear that the lack in development is going to cost Hikaru some headaches here, right? King f7, knight b5, it's really difficult to guard this, and this threat is looming. So Hikaru gives away a7, wins the a2 pawn, but now bishop d4, and there's no easy way to defend the knight, so you have to bring it back and lose a pawn. Now at this point, the position is decisively better for Magnus. It is completely winning. He's up a pawn. He's about to get the rook to c7, and black's pieces are extremely passive. So, what happens? Well, Magnus thought for a while here and played knight c3. That is an inaccuracy because it allows the rook access to the c2 square from which it puts some pressure and allows Hikaru back into the game. And again, Hikaru in the match interview said that if Magnus played just a very Magnesian move, you know, improving his king a little bit, he didn't know what he was going to do. He didn't know what he was going to do. He was looking around. He was trying to find play, and probably we would have, Magnus would have kept up the pressure. But as he did with knight c3, he then played like this and traded the rook, and he did it and then brought the knight back. But this got one of his most important pieces out of the game, and this still slowly started to allow Hikaru to create counterplay. So first he played f5, because if you take, you lose the knight. Then he played bishop c5. Because if you trade, you simplify and black is getting closer to an endgame where they can hold. And then Hikaru started getting pawns off the board, and this is how you get a draw. You try to cut the pawns down. Rook knight in 2 versus rook knight in 3 is holdable. And that is exactly what happened. Magnus then blundered a knight fork to lose the b3 pawn for the h7 pawn, and 2-on-1 is a draw. Even rook and knight versus rook is a draw. I mean, obviously, some of us might be more capable of losing it than others, but the rest of the game is just some shuffling. Both players had about 30 seconds here. Like I said, not too much is happening, but Hikaru got activated with his pieces here, put the pressure, and he's just trying to hold. A draw wins the mini-match. And that is what happened, with one minor headache of the king almost getting checkmated on this side of the board, but luckily he was able to escape and force the pieces off. Knight takes g4, pawn takes, you just take this, and it's over. And here he played rook h3, getting his knight off, and that was it. A draw by force in the final blitz game, a win for Hikaru in the mini-match, and he goes up 2-1 in the overall standings. Tomorrow, coverage continues once again at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, myself and Anna Rudolph over on Twitch. If you're not there already, there is a link to my channel in the description below, as well as other things like the Discord. Close to 5,000 members, people. Come hang out. Great chess community, as well as some openings courses you can check out. I have a course on e4, d4, Caro-Kann, and the e6, b6 setup. I have nothing else to say. Listen, your support on yesterday's video was incredible. If you've made it this far, what more to ask of you? Just keep being awesome, keep being amazing, and I'll see you in tomorrow's recap video.